what is the best entity structure that you recommend for real estate investors? And does it differ for someone that's doing flipping versus someone that's doing wholesaling or buy and hold?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the biggest misconception is that real estate investing is, when it comes to asset protection, it's a one size fits all. And it truly isn't. I tell people that when you're thinking about investing and creating a business, the way I look at it is a three-legged stool. You have asset protection as one leg, you have tax planning as a second leg of that stool, and that third leg is what we refer to as business planning. And if you're going to start investing, you need to look at it as a business. And whatever you put into effect to help you grow your investing needs to take into consideration all three of those. For example, if you went to a local attorney and you asked, what should I set up? That attorney will probably tell you, if you're flipping real estate, wholesaling real estate, or just buy and hold, create a limited liability company. And if you went to the CPA and you said, I'm holding real estate, they'll probably tell you, treat it as a disregarded entity, maybe a partnership. Or if you're flipping, an S corp. But then there's that other side, the business planning leg. If you start talking to them and say, well, how am I going to look better to lenders if I want to go out and borrow money? And they're probably not going to understand how the entities in your tax returns can impact your ability to borrow, which is then can impact your ability to scale. So your question, depending on what I'm doing, is really going to be dependent based upon where you want to take your business. So if you want to get a little more granular, if I was going to flip real estate or wholesale real estate, then I'm usually going to use either a limited liability company treated as an S or a C corp for federal tax purposes, or I'm going to use a traditional Inc. corporation treated as a C or S. And those two decisions are driven more so by the investment the individual investor is making to get their business set up. And then if you're buy and hold, then now it's all over the board. I mean, typically it's going to be an LLC, or it could be a Wyoming statutory trust if you live in California and you want to avoid the $800 a year franchise tax. Or if you're investing in Tennessee, maybe it's a land trust back to an LLC, or Florida is going to be land trust. And those buy and hold investors, how do you source your properties? Are you sourcing your properties because you're throwing the leads out like what your system is designed to do to attract individuals, or are you going to auctions? And so depending on how you source your properties, we're going to come up with a different strategy for that as well, using different tools. And so what we try to do is develop an approach for our clientele that is specific to not only the type of investing they're engaging in, but where they're investing. Because every state, well, not every state, but a lot of states have some nuances that you should be aware of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I invest in Indiana, and you mentioned about Tennessee, I believe. So the way I have my structure set up is every property that we buy it in a separate land trust of its own. It's very easy to set up a land trust. We don't have to file the document anywhere, and then all of the land trust do I have, depending on whether if I'm going to flip a property, I'm going to keep it as a rental. The beneficiary of that trust is an LLC. If it's a rental, it's a separate LLC. If it's a house flipping, then it's a separate LLC. And then I use my LLC as, the operating entity for all the trusts that I have. And when we sell a property, everything is done under that trust. And then for the EIN number purposes, we use the EIN for LLC. Is that the right approach to do? I mean, again, I'm investing in Indiana, but I'm moving to California in about 4 months there. So I think that might change things a little bit for me.
A little bit there. Yeah. Mind if I share out a screen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's your entity. This is going to be a corporation. Could be an LLC, taxed as an S or C. It doesn't matter. But the idea is this is your base entity. Now, when you acquire a property, right? The question is, am I going to flip this property? Am I going to wholesale this property, or am I going to keep this property? Many times, I've done the same thing with my business. I buy 18 homes with the intention of flipping them, and I get in there and I start doing the rehab work. I'm like, well, you know what? I want to keep 3 of these for myself. So I'm going to carve those out and I'll flip the other 15. So by buying them in a land trust, and I like doing this because, as you stated, the land trusts are easy. You just set them up. Many times you just name them after the property address. You have the land trust created, and the corp is the beneficiary of that trust. Now, I'll take it one step further. I will use a limited liability company. I'll set this one up in Wyoming, and I'll make that the trustee of my land trust. And the reason why is I want anonymity. I don't want people to know that that trust is tied back to me, because they can't see the beneficiary because the trust isn't recorded anywhere. The only entity on title, or two individuals on title, would be the trust name and the trustee. So I have a choice. I could take title of this property as Clint Coons, trustee, of GB Trust, or I could create this LLC, and the LLC is, Funky Town LLC, trustee of the GB Trust. So by using the LLC, if someone were to look up the Funky Town Limited Liability Company, it's a Wyoming LLC. It doesn't point back to me because they don't collect any information. So I like that privacy aspect of how I put deals together by using that trustee there. But the benefit of using the land trust in this situation is, threefold. One of the concerns that you can run into sometimes with sellers is that if you're going to wholesale this deal, and if you're out there marketing it and they find out about it, they get wind about it, they could walk away and just sell it to someone else. I have a client right in Texas right now. We set up a structure just like this. He takes title in land. He wasn't using land trust, but he was doing it in his corporation. Well, seller found out he was trying to wholesale it and he wasn't going to close. So the individual turned around and sold it to someone else because he realized there was some extra profit there. And so now he's left with this option. What do I do? Sue? I said, yeah, it's going to be expensive. So I like the anonymity aspect here, because by taking in the land trust, they don't know who's involved, and maybe you're marketing it through your corporation. They're not going to see that. The seller wouldn't necessarily see that. The other thing is, let's assume that you're in a state or with that contract that doesn't allow you to assign the interest. Maybe you didn't put in there and or designated entity when you entered into the purchase and sale agreement. So with a land trust, you don't have to worry about any of that any longer, because if I wanted to wholesale this deal and here's my investor, I just kick them the trust. They just take over the trust. Now they have it. I resign as trustee, they become the trustee, and then they're in control of that property, because the property will close in the name of the trust. Now, if I didn't want to do that and I wanted to keep this deal as my own, put it part of my portfolio. So in my portfolio, the way I've set it up, I have a second Wyoming LLC over here that has state specific. So I have Indiana LLCs because I also own real estate in Indianapolis. My portfolio there, I think, is 12 properties. I think I have in that area. So I have LLCs set up. What I'll do is I will assign, it's just a piece of paper. I just transfer the beneficial interest over to the LLC. And now it's no longer, this land trust is no longer held by my corp. It's held by this Indiana Limited Liability Company. And then if I determined later, I sat back and I looked at this LLC and I thought, you know what? I don't want this property in this limited liability company anymore. I want to move it out. I could just assign the interest again over to another company. And every time I assign this interest, no one knows where that trust sits because it's not recorded anywhere. Title's in the name of the trust, but who owns the trust? That's all private. Now, if I decided to flip the deal, so if this property, I'm not doing any of this, I'm just going to flip it, I rehab it, and I flip the property. Well, then on my deals, when I go to closing, what I'll typically do with the trust itself, I haven't opened a bank account, which I don't tend to open up bank accounts for my land trust, just because I have so many accounts then I would have to deal with. I will, depend on your title company, I'll typically file a DBA for this entity here using this trust name. That way, when title, I'll ask for a physical check. They'll send me a physical check at closing, and then I can go down to my entity and just deposit it into the entity. So this entity will have multiple DBAs associated with it, just for purposes of negotiating those checks. if you don't want to sit there and open up a separate bank account. So there's a lot of ways to do it, but that's just, I'm giving you a sense of how I've done it personally and how I work with our clients as well.
Yeah, I think this is really, really cool. So you're right. I mean, the way I have my entity, my structure set up is I am the trustee, and then we had recently, just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, we sold a property. And then most of the time we don't have this issue where we give them the wiring instructions for my LLC and they would wire the money. But every now and then we've had this issue where the name on the deed, which is the trust, doesn't match with, when I'm wiring the money. So they would actually send me a physical check and it has my name on it. So I've had to deposit it in my personal account. And once the check clears, then I move it into my business account. I love this approach of having the LLC as the trustee. Then this way I can have a separate bank account set up so it never actually goes through my personal bank account.